All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something, I think really practical for everyone who's interested in learning effectively.
Yeah.
We've got some excerpts from an English language learning podcast
Okay.
that's specifically aimed at intermediate learners.
Right. Right.
And so that means B1 and B2 levels.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I don't even know what that means, don't worry, we're going to talk about
Yeah, we'll break it down.
exactly.
We'll unpack it.
Yeah, so think of this as, I don't know, almost like examining the roadmap for taking your English skills to that next level.
Right.
And I think what's cool about this is we might be able to draw some parallels for efficient learning at other areas too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, like how to structure your learning, how to think about progressing through different stages of competence. So our mission today is to really pinpoint what defines these levels, B1 and B2, and extract some really useful insights on how a dedicated learner can actually make progress, not just in language learning, but maybe in anything.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting here is we're not actually trying to teach English grammar.
Right.
We're trying to understand the structure and the focus of a resource that's designed to teach it. So it's sort of like a meta-analysis.
Yeah, it's like we're learning about learning.
Exactly.
Which is very meta.
Yeah.
So yeah, have you ever wondered what the real difference is between like someone who can get by in English
Right.
versus someone who can really like express themselves fluently? And more importantly, what are those steps to bridge that gap?
Yeah. How do you get from A to B?
Yeah.
Let's see what this source material says.
Okay, cool.
So to start off with, let's try to understand how the source podcast actually defines this B1 level.
Okay.
So intermediate English.
Yeah.
According to these excerpts, at B1, you as the learner should be able to engage in conversations about familiar subjects. So things like your work,
Okay.
travel, family, hobbies.
So pretty much everyday stuff.
Yeah.
The things that you encounter, you should be able to talk about those in English.
Right. And not just talk about them, but also understand when other people are talking about them.
Gotcha.
So it highlights the ability to understand everyday discussions and then also to clearly express your opinions on those things.
Yeah, so at B1, it's more than just like, ordering a coffee or asking for directions.
Yeah, right.
You're actually like starting to have conversations with people where you connect on a personal level. You share experiences, you share thoughts.
Right.
And I think what's insightful for us as efficient learners is this stage moves beyond just like basic comprehension.
Right.
To actually producing language.
Yeah, output is so important.
Right. So like, how can you take that idea and almost like reverse engineer it and say, okay, well, if I'm trying to learn something new, how can I make sure that I'm not just passively taking in the information, but I'm actually doing something with it?
Putting it into practice.
Exactly. Yeah.
So with language learning, it might be finding those opportunities to speak about those familiar topics, and that's how you solidify your understanding.
That makes sense.
So it's really moving away from just those basic essential phrases to a more functional use of language in different contexts.
Okay.
Now, when we look at the B2 level, which is that upper intermediate, the source material describes it as the stage where you're able to grasp more complex ideas.
Okay.
You can read longer texts. You can speak with more confidence and assurance.
Gotcha. So there's definitely like a step up in sophistication.
Yeah.
In terms of like the things you can understand and talk about.
Right. And it specifically mentions the increasing use of natural expressions.
Oh, okay.
And more intricate grammar.
Okay, so that's really interesting because it's not just about like knowing more words.
Right.
It's about like using the language in a way that sounds more natural.
You're starting to sound more like a native speaker.
Gotcha.
And that's a big part of B2.
Yeah, because, I mean, think about it in any field, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're learning to play an instrument or you're learning to code or anything, there's that point where you move beyond just like the basics.
Yeah.
And you start to develop your own style.
Right. You start to internalize the rules and then bend them a little bit.
Exactly.
And that's what starts to happen at B2.
Yeah, like that, yeah.
So it's a deeper understanding, a more nuanced application. And the source material uses a really interesting analogy to describe these levels.
Oh, what's that?
It describes it as a bridge.
Ooh, okay.
So B1 and B2, they're the bridge that connects those beginner stages to fluency.
I like that.
It's a really helpful way to think about it.
Yeah, because it shows you that it's not just like an arbitrary classification.
Right.
It's actually like these are important stepping stones
to
get to where you want to go.
Exactly.
Which is in this case, fluency in English.
Yeah. And it highlights that B1 and B2 are not just about reaching a certain level, but about building a solid foundation.
Yeah.
So you're not just rushing towards advanced.
Right.
You're really taking the time to master these intermediate stages because they're fundamental for long-term success.
Okay. And it's kind of like that in anything, right? Like you don't want to just skip ahead to the really advanced stuff until you've mastered the basic.
You got to get the fundamentals down.
Exactly.
And that's what these levels represent.
Yeah, I love that analogy. That's super helpful.
Yeah.
So, okay, we've got a better understanding now of what these levels actually mean. But let's get into some specifics now.
Yeah, let's dive in a little deeper.
What kind of, grammar does this English learning podcast actually focus on?
Yeah, what are they teaching? Well, the source material makes it very clear that the grammar they cover isn't just about abstract rules. Right. It's centered around practical application in real-life situations.
That makes sense, yeah.
And I think that's key for you as a listener because you always want to know what's useful, what can I actually apply?
Right. It's not just about, knowing what a grammar rule is.
Right.
It's about knowing how to use it and when to use it.
Exactly.
To communicate effectively.
Yeah, nobody wants to just sit there and memorize grammar tables.
Yeah.
It's got to be something you can actually put into practice.
Okay, so building on that idea of practical application, what are some specific grammar points that the source highlights as being, really crucial for B1 and B2 learners?
Yeah, so they give a pretty clear list.
Okay.
First, they talk about understanding the nuances of the present perfect and the past simple tenses.
Okay.
So knowing when to use each one to accurately talk about time and events in the past.
Right, because, those can be tricky.
Oh, they can be very tricky.
Especially for English learners.
Yeah.
So mastering those is a huge step forward.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. What else is on the list?
Next, they mention first, second, and third conditionals, which are all about exploring those hypothetical situations.
Yeah, what if?
Exactly, all those possibilities.
Yeah.
And again, conditionals can be pretty tricky for learners to get their heads around.
It's like you're going down this rabbit hole of ifs and thens and all these possibilities.
You can feel like a maze.
Yeah, exactly.
But once you master them, it really opens up your ability to discuss all those different scenarios.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we've got tenses and conditionals. What other grammar areas do they focus on?
Okay, so next up is the passive voice.
Okay.
Now, some people might see the passive voice as really complex and kind of avoid it.
Yeah, it can seem a little intimidating.
But it's actually a super useful tool for efficient communication.
Okay.
Especially when you're in situations where the person performing the action isn't as important as the action itself.
Gotcha.
Or when you want to have a more formal tone.
Oh, okay.
So like in academic writing or something like that.
So it's not just about avoiding it.
No.
It's about understanding, when is the right tool to use to communicate effectively.
And understanding how it works can really boost your comprehension of more complex texts.
That makes sense.
Okay, then after that, we've got modal verbs.
Modal verbs?
Yeah, so those are those little helpers like can, must, should, could, might.
Oh, yeah. Those are those little words that pack a lot of meaning.
They really do.
Yeah.
They can express ability, obligation, possibility, all sorts of things.
So if you want to say, I can speak English.
Exactly.
Or I should study more.
I might go to the party.
Yeah, exactly.
All of those are using modal verbs.
Super useful.
Very practical for everyday interactions.
Okay, cool. So we've got a good range of verb tenses and structures there. What else?
They also talk about future forms. So using will, going to, present continuous, all those different ways of talking about future plans and events.
Right. So I will go to the store tomorrow.
Exactly.
Or I'm going to the store tomorrow.
I'm going to watch a movie tonight.
Yeah. All those different ways of expressing the future.
Right, and understanding the subtle differences between them.
Okay.
And then they also specifically mention reported speech.
Reported speech.
Yeah, which is really key for efficient communication because it lets you talk about what other people have said without directly quoting them.
Right, so it's a more concise way of conveying information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It streamlines your speech and your writing.
Okay.
Then there are relative clauses.
Okay.
Which let you combine ideas within a sentence.
Yeah.
So they help you create more sophisticated and efficient sentences.
So you can pack more information in.
Yeah, exactly.
Without making it sound too clunky.
Right. And then finally, they talk about past continuous and past perfect.
Okay.
Which are important for telling stories.
Yeah.
And narrating past events. So making sure that you have a clear understanding of the timeline and the sequence of actions.
So like what was happening when something else happened.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So that is a pretty comprehensive list.
What's a good range?
It seems like this podcast really wants to give learners the tools they need to express themselves in all sorts of different ways.
Give them that grammatical toolkit.
Exactly.
And the source material really emphasizes that they explain these concepts with clear examples and easy-to-understand stories.
Yeah, which is great.
So you're not just bombarded with abstract grammar rules.
Yeah.
It's all presented in a way that's digestible and relatable.
And I think that's a big part of making grammar feel less intimidating.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not about these rigid rules.
Right.
It's about how language actually works.
Exactly.
So it's a more natural approach.
Okay, cool. So we've talked about grammar.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about vocabulary.
Vocabulary.
Which is like the other cornerstone.
The building blocks.
Of language learning.
Absolutely.
So what approach does this podcast take to building vocabulary for these B1 and B2 learners?
So the source emphasizes a structured approach.
Okay.
So each episode aims to introduce a certain number of new words and expressions.
Okay, how many are we talking?
So they specifically say 5 to 10.
Okay, so a manageable chunk.
Yeah, it's not overwhelming.
Not like 100 new words every episode.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that kind of targeted learning is really effective because it prevents that feeling of being completely overwhelmed by endless new words.
Yeah, because that can be so discouraging.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, you just feel like you're never going to catch up.
It's like drinking from a fire hose.
Exactly, yeah.
But if you focus on a smaller set of words each time,
yeah,
you can really make steady progress.
Yeah, and you can actually like learn them.
Right, you can actually internalize them.
And use them.
Yeah. Which is the whole point.
Okay, so 5 to 10 words per episode. That's good to know.
And they also talk about how they organize those words by topic.
Oh, okay.
Which is another really smart strategy because it helps you build a relevant lexicon for the contexts that you're most likely to encounter.
So it's not just like random words. It's like, okay, if we're talking about travel, these are the words that you're going to need to be able to talk about travel.
And that makes it much easier to remember them.
Right, because you're learning them in context. Okay, so it's organized by topic. We like that.
Yeah.
What about the types of vocabulary? Like, are they focusing on any specific categories?
Yeah. So they do mention a few specific categories that they prioritize.
Okay.
First, they talk about phrasal verbs and idioms.
Okay.
Which are really key to sounding more natural and idiomatic in English.
Yeah, because those are the things that you don't really learn in a textbook.
Exactly.
But you hear native speakers using all the time.
They're those little expressions that make you sound more fluent.
Yeah.
They also focus on synonyms and antonyms.
Okay.
Which help you expand your vocabulary, but also understand the nuances of meaning between different words.
Right, because sometimes there are subtle differences between words that seem like they mean the same thing, but they actually have slightly different connotations.
Right.
So understanding those is really helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So we've got phrasal verbs, idioms, synonyms, antonyms. What else?
And they make a point of saying that they include words that native speakers actually use in everyday conversations.
I like that.
Yeah, so it's not just about learning words from a dictionary. It's about learning how people actually speak.
So it's like you're getting a real-world education in the language.
Right.
Okay, cool. And it sounds like they also prioritize clarity in explaining these new words and expressions.
Yeah, they really emphasize providing simple definitions and examples.
Okay.
And they even give some specific examples.
Oh, cool. Like what?
Like delay equals when something is late. Improve equals to make something better.
Right.
Give up equals to stop trying.
Okay, so really straightforward explanations.
Yeah, just breaking it down.
Which I think is essential for vocabulary acquisition. Right, like you don't want to get bogged down in these complex definitions. You just want to understand the basic meaning.
Yeah, and then you can start using the words, and then your understanding will deepen over time.
That makes sense.
Okay, so we've talked about the building blocks. The grammar and the vocabulary.
Right.
But how about the actual strategies for learners to actually improve their English skills at this B1, B2 level?
Right. Like what are some things that they can actually do to get better?
Yeah. So the source material really emphasizes active engagement rather than passive consumption.
Right.
So it's not just about listening. It's about actually doing something with the language.
And I think that's a really important point for any kind of learning.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Like you can't just sit there and expect to absorb information by osmosis.
You've got to be active.
Yeah, you've got to engage with it.
You've got to do something.
Exactly.
So what kind of techniques do they recommend for accelerating progress?
Yeah. What are some things people can do?
So they give several concrete tips.
Okay.
The first is frequent listening.
Okay.
So listening to English as much as you can.
Yeah.
Podcasts, videos, songs.
Music, anything.
Yeah, anything you can get your hands on.
And of course, that includes this podcast.
Exactly. You're already doing it.
So you're already ahead of the game.
Yeah.
All right, cool. What else?
They also suggest repeating out loud.
Oh, okay.
So copying the pronunciation and the intonation of native speakers.
So it's like you're mimicking them.
Exactly.
Right.
And that can be really helpful for improving your speaking skills.
Because you're getting a feel for the rhythm of the language.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're getting that muscle memory.
Okay, cool. What else?
They also emphasize using new words actively.
Okay.
So whether it's speaking, writing, even just thinking in English.
Right. So it's like you're constantly trying to incorporate these new words into your daily life.
Yeah. And that's crucial for solidifying your vocabulary. Because if you just learn a word and then never use it, you're going to forget it.
You're going to lose it.
Exactly.
Okay. Oh.
They also suggest writing a little bit every day.
Oh, okay.
Even if it's just a few sentences.
Yeah.
Because that's a great way to practice your grammar and vocabulary
Right.
in a more structured context.
Yeah, and it helps you to like notice where you're making mistakes.
Exactly. It forces you to slow down
Yeah.
and really think about the language.
And then you can go back and fix those mistakes.
Exactly.
Right, cool.
And then finally, they reiterate the importance of being active, not passive.
Right.
So don't just listen, but speak.
Speak.
Whenever you can find those opportunities.
Put yourself out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's a theme that comes up again and again in language learning.
It's not enough to just take in the information.
You have to produce it.
You have to use it.
Yeah.
And I love the encouragement that the source material gives to learners.
Because it's so easy to get discouraged.
Oh, yeah.
When you're learning a language.
Especially because it's such a long process.
It is.
And you feel like you're not making progress.
Yeah.
But they say, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to keep going.
That's such a good point.
And they also highlight that small steps every day equals big results later.
Yeah. Consistency is key.
Right.
It's not about being perfect. It's about just doing something every day.
Even if it's just a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that applies to anything you're trying to learn.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so if someone were to listen to this English learning podcast regularly, what kind of outcomes could they actually expect?
So they break down what you can expect from each episode.
Okay.
So first of all, you're going to get a short story or topic presented in natural English.
Okay.
So this is giving you that authentic listening practice. You're hearing the language as it's really spoken.
So you're not just getting like textbook English.
Exactly. You're getting the real deal.
Awesome.
You're also going to get that focused vocabulary segment.
Yeah.
So you're expanding your word knowledge in a structured way. And importantly, they're going to explain a grammar point in the context of that story or topic.
Oh, okay. So it's all integrated.
Yeah.
It's not just like, here's the grammar, here's the vocabulary.
It's all woven together.
Yeah.
So you can see how it all fits together.
I like that. That's really cool.
And that's a really effective way to learn.
Yeah.
Because you're not just learning isolated concepts. You're seeing how they're actually used.
Okay, what else?
They also give you the chance to repeat and practice.
Oh, okay.
So you're actually producing the language.
So you're not just passively listening.
Right.
You're actually like saying the words out loud.
Exactly.
And that's so important for developing your speaking skills.
Yeah, you're building that muscle memory.
And they also include mini exercises or listening comprehension questions.
To keep you engaged and to make sure that you're actually understanding what you're listening to.
So it's like built-in accountability.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
And then they also talk about how often they release new episodes.
Okay, how often is that?
3 times a week.
Okay, so that's pretty frequent.
Yeah.
So you're getting a consistent stream of new content.
Exactly.
Which is great for staying motivated.
And for keeping that momentum going in your learning.
I like that.
So yeah, it's a really well-structured resource.
Yeah, this has been a really interesting deep dive.
Yeah.
And I think for our listeners who are all about, learning effectively and efficiently, we've really illuminated some of the key characteristics of B1 and B2 English levels.
Yeah.
We've talked about the essential grammar and vocabulary that's targeted.
And the practical strategies for learning.
Exactly. And I think a lot of those strategies can be applied to other subjects as well.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about language learning.
Yeah.
It's about learning in general.
It's those meta skills that you can transfer.
So thinking about that structured approach to grammar and vocabulary, it makes you wonder how you could apply that to other areas of your life.
Absolutely.
So how could you break down a complex topic into smaller, more manageable chunks?
Right.
And focus on consistent practice, just like you would with learning a language.
And I think that's the key takeaway here. It's that consistency.
It's not about being perfect.
It's about showing up every day.
Exactly. It's about putting in the work.
And making those small steps.
Yeah, that's how you make real progress.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, this was fun.
It's always a pleasure to explore these topics with you.
Likewise.
And for our listeners, keep learning, keep growing, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.